When two orphans aged out of the system, all they inherited was their grandfather's derelict barn. But what they discovered in the loft wouldn't just change their lives. It would decide the fate of an entire town. If you've ever felt like the world had forgotten you, stick around. Hit that subscribe button because this story is for you. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction. For 10 years, the St. Jude's Home for Children had been the only world my sister Maya and I had ever really known. It was a world of beige walls, echoing hallways, and the faint institutional smell of bleach and boiled vegetables. It wasn't a home, but it was consistent. Now that consistency was over. A social worker named Mrs. Gable, a woman with a perpetually tired expression and a floral scarf that smelled of stale perfume, drove us away from its wrought iron gates in a dented county sedan. Maya was 16, technically still a ward of the state, but my legal adulthood meant we were a package deal. They called it a family reunification plan, a fancy term for washing their hands of us. I watched the familiar red brick of St. Jude's shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just a smudge against the gray, unforgiving sky. Maya sat beside me, her small frame rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped the worn strap of her duffel bag. She hadn't said a word since we'd signed the final papers. Her silence was a heavy blanket in the car, thick with all the things we were too scared to say out loud. We were free, but we were also homeless, parentless, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. All we had was a name on a piece of paper, a single key, and a destination 2 hours north of the only city we'd ever known. The Abernathy Estate, the document had read, a grand name for what we were about to inherit. Mrs. Gable tried to fill the silence with practiced cheerfulness. It'll be an adventure, girls, a real fresh start. Your grandfather, he wanted you to have it. She didn't know him. None of us did, not really. He was just a ghost in our history, the father of the mother we barely remembered. A man who sent a $5 bill and a flimsy card once a year for our birthdays until the cards just stopped coming. His death 2 years ago had been a footnote, a notice forwarded to the home's administration. We hadn't even known he had anything to leave. The fact that he did felt less like a gift and more like a cosmic joke. The city gave way to suburbs, the suburbs to sparse countryside. The sky wept a cold, persistent drizzle that smeared the world outside the car windows. Maya finally spoke, her voice small and brittle. What if it's nothing, Elle? What if it's just a pile of wood? I didn't have an answer. The fear that she had just voiced was a cold knot in my stomach. A pile of wood. A patch of dirt. A final, cruel punchline from a life that had never been kind. We'll make it something, I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. It was my job to be the strong one, the hopeful one. It had been my job ever since we'd watched our mother fade away in a hospital bed that smelled as sterile and impersonal as the orphanage she'd saved us from. We finally turned off the main highway onto a cracked asphalt road, then onto a gravel lane that spit pebbles against the car's undercarriage. Mrs. Gable slowed the sedan, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. This must be it, she said, her professional optimism finally wavering. And there it was. Not a house, not even a shack, just a barn. It stood alone in a field of overgrown, skeletal weeds, its gray wood siding weathered and splintered, its gambrel roof sagging in the middle like the spine of an old, tired animal. A few of the roof shingles were missing, leaving dark, gaping wounds. One of the huge sliding doors hung crookedly on its track. It wasn't a pile of wood. It was worse. It was a monument to decay. Maya made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. My own hope, a tiny flickering candle I'd been guarding in my chest, was extinguished by the sight. This wasn't a fresh start. This was an ending. Mrs. Gable cleared her throat. Well, it's rustic. Lots of potential. She handed me a thick manila envelope and a single, heavy, rust-pocked iron key. The lawyer's office is in town. A Mr. Abernathy. He's expecting you. He'll explain everything. She gave us a look that was a mixture of pity and relief. Her job was done. She couldn't leave fast enough. The sedan crunched back down the gravel lane, leaving us standing in the rain, staring at our inheritance. The envelope felt heavy in my hand. The key was cold as ice. We stood there for a long time, the drizzle soaking into our thin jackets, the silence of the countryside roaring in our ears. This was it. This was all we had left. The town was called Northwood. It was one of those places that seemed to have been forgotten by time, a handful of brick buildings huddled together on a single main street. Mr. Abernathy's office was on the second floor of the oldest-looking one, above a dusty antique shop. The stairs creaked under our feet, each step echoing the hollowness inside me. The office itself was small and cluttered, smelling of old paper, leather, and faint pipe tobacco. Bookshelves overflowed, stacks of files teetered on every available surface, and a fine layer of dust coated everything, disturbed only by the paths the lawyer must have taken from his desk to the door. Mr. Abernathy himself was a man who seemed to be made of the same material as his office. He was old, with a fringe of white hair around a bald head, and a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come from a lifetime of listening to other people's troubles. He wore a rumpled tweed jacket and peered at us over a pair of half-moon glasses. He wasn't unkind, but his eyes held a weary sort of sadness, the look of a man who had delivered bad news more times than he could count. "Eleanor, Maya, please sit," he said, gesturing to two rickety wooden chairs in front of his massive oak desk. He didn't smile. He shuffled through a thick file with our names on it. "I was your grandfather's lawyer for nearly 40 years, he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "He was a good man, Elias. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." He paused, looking at us. "He loved your mother very much, and he loved you. I want you to know that. Before we get into the particulars," the word particulars hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I glanced at Maya. She was staring at a water stain on the ceiling, her expression completely blank, a mask she wore when she was trying not to fall apart. "As you know," Mr. Abernathy continued, "your grandfather passed 2 years ago. His estate was complicated." He pulled out a sheaf of papers. "The property, the 10 acres of land, and the barn are legally yours. The deed is clear. He made sure of that." A tiny, fragile sliver of relief pierced my anxiety. We owned something. 10 acres. It sounded vast, important, but the lawyer's expression stopped the feeling from taking root. "However," he said, and there it was, the other shoe I'd been waiting for. "Elias fell behind on his property taxes, quite a bit behind, and there were other debts, medical bills from his final illness." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an official-looking document from the county, covered in red ink. The number at the bottom made the air leave my lungs. It was an impossible sum, more money than I could even imagine. "The county has a lien on the property," he explained gently. "The back taxes must be paid. You have 90 days from today, your 18th birthday, Eleanor, to settle the debt. If you don't, the county will seize the property and sell it at auction." 90 days, it might as well have been 90 seconds. We had less than $200 between us, the final payout from the state. "But there is an alternative," he said, steepling his fingers. "A development corporation, Westridge Properties, has been trying to acquire the land in this area for years. They made your grandfather an offer before he passed, and they've renewed it. It's a standing offer." He slid another paper across the desk. This one was a purchase agreement. The offer price was substantial. It would pay off the tax debt, the other bills, and leave us with a significant amount of money. Enough to get an apartment, for Maya to finish school. Enough for a real fresh start. It was a lifeline, a clean, simple solution to an impossible problem. Maya finally looked down from the ceiling, her eyes lighting up with the first spark of hope I'd seen all day. "We can sell it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Mr. Abernathy said. "You can sign the papers today. The money would be in an account for you within a week." Maya looked at me, her expression pleading. "Take it, Elle. Please, let's just be done with this." And every rational part of my brain agreed with her. It was the smart choice, the only choice. Sell the rotting barn, sell the weed-choked land, and walk away. Be free of this place, of this ghost of a family we never knew. But something held me back, a strange, illogical feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was his, the grandfather we never knew. This was the only thing he had left to give us. Selling it felt like a betrayal, though I couldn't say of what or to whom. Can we, can we have some time to think about it? I asked, my voice shaky. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. Of course, the offer will stand, but the 90-day clock is ticking. He pushed the heavy iron key back across the desk. He wanted you to have this place, Eleanor. For whatever reason, this barn was important to him. He fought to keep it. He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Go see it for yourselves. Spend some time there. The decision is yours. As we walked out of the office and back down the creaking stairs, the weight of the key in my pocket felt immense. It wasn't just a key to a barn anymore. It was the key to a choice that felt far too big for me. A choice between a safe, predictable future and a past I didn't understand. Maya grabbed my arm as soon as we hit the street. We have to sell, Elle. You know that, right? This is our only chance. I looked back up at the dusty window of the lawyer's office, then down the quiet street toward the edge of town, where our barn was waiting. I know, I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The walk back to the property was less than a mile, but it felt like a journey across a foreign country. We left the small cluster of buildings that made up Northwood's town center and walked along the shoulder of the cracked road. Cars were infrequent, and the people who drove them stared at us. Two strangers in worn-out jackets with matching duffel bags slung over our shoulders. We were outsiders, and we felt it in every curious glance. The drizzle had stopped, but the air was still heavy and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. The sky was a uniform sheet of gray, pressing down on the landscape. Maya was quiet again, but this time it was a tense, angry silence. She walked a few paces ahead of me, her shoulders hunched, radiating disappointment. She thought I was being foolish, sentimental. Maybe I was. I couldn't explain the feeling, not even to myself. At St. Jude's, everything we had was temporary, borrowed, or communal. Our clothes came from donation bins. Our beds belonged to the state. Our very lives were managed by a file in a cabinet. The idea of owning something, truly owning it, a piece of land, a building that had belonged to our family, was so alien it felt sacred. To give it up without even trying to understand it felt like throwing away the only real thing we'd ever been given. As we turned onto the gravel lane, the barn came into view again. In the flat, shadowless light of the overcast afternoon, it looked even more desolate. Its silence seemed profound, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. It's a wreck, Elle, Maya said, stopping at the edge of the property line. Look at it. It's going to fall down if the wind blows too hard. She was right. From up close, it was even worse. The wood was soft and rotting in places, stained dark with years of rain. The foundation was a crumbling line of fieldstones. A gust of wind rattled the crooked door on its track, a mournful, metallic screech that sounded like a groan of pain. This wasn't a home. It was a ruin. The developer's offer felt like a siren song, pulling us towards safety and sense. All I had to do was let go of this ridiculous, unformed idea in my head, this vague loyalty to a dead man and his decaying legacy. We walked across the muddy, weed-choked yard. The ground was soft and squelched under our shoes. The huge sliding door that was still on its track was swollen with damp and wedged shut. I put my shoulder into it and pushed. It didn't budge. I tried again, grunting with the effort. Maya just watched, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. It's locked from the inside, probably, she said, or just rusted shut. Let's just go back to town. We can call Mr. Abernathy. We can sign the papers. I ignored her. I walked the perimeter, my boots sinking into the mud. Around the side, I found a smaller, normal-sized door, its green paint peeling away in long strips, and next to it, a newer, heavy-duty padlock. I pulled the old iron key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a gritty sound of metal on rust. I turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. I put all my weight into it, my knuckles scraping against the wood, and then, with a loud, satisfying clank, the lock sprang open. I pulled the heavy padlock off the hasp and took a deep breath. This was it. The air that drifted out from the crack in the door was cool and musty, the smell of packed earth, ancient hay, and something else. something like time itself. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a low, deep groan, the sound of a sleeping giant being disturbed. The inside of the barn was vast and dark, filled with colossal shadows. The only light came from the open doorway and from thin, dusty shafts that pierced the gloom from cracks in the walls and roof. It was like stepping into a cathedral of neglect. The sheer scale of the space was breathtaking. The ceiling soared upwards, lost in the darkness, a complex web of massive timber beams and rafters. The floor was packed earth, cold and hard under my feet. The space was mostly empty. A few old, rusted pieces of farm equipment sat silently in a corner, draped in thick cobwebs. A stack of rotting pallets leaned against a wall. An old workbench stood under a grimy window, littered with broken tools and mason jars filled with rusty nails and screws. It was a cavern of forgotten things. Maya hovered in the doorway, unwilling to step inside. "There's nothing here, Elle," she said, her voice echoing in the huge space. "Just junk." I didn't answer. I walked slowly toward the center of the barn, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I could see the whole structure now, the incredible craftsmanship of it. The massive posts were hand-hewn from whole trees. The joinery was complex and precise. This barn hadn't been thrown together. It had been built by someone who knew what they were doing, someone who intended it to last for centuries. It was wounded, yes, neglected and sagging, but its bones were strong. I ran my hand over one of the main support beams. The wood was cool and smooth, polished by time. I felt a connection, a strange sense of reverence for the unknown hands that had shaped it. In the far corner, almost hidden in shadow, I saw it. A wooden ladder, sturdy and well-made, nailed to the wall. It led straight up to a square opening in the ceiling. The loft. My heart started to beat a little faster. Whatever answers there were, whatever reason Grandpa had fought to keep this place, I felt a sudden, certain conviction that it was up there. "I'm going up," I said. Maya's voice was sharp with alarm. "Are you crazy? The floor will probably collapse. You'll kill yourself." "I'll be careful," I said, already walking toward the ladder. I tested the first rung. It was solid. I began to climb, my hands gripping the smooth, worn wood. The air grew warmer and thicker as I ascended, the smell of dry hay and dust becoming more intense. I pulled myself up through the opening and onto the floor of the loft. And I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. This was not what I expected. The loft wasn't just a hayloft, it was a room, a secret, hidden apartment. The floor was covered with thick, smooth planks, swept clean. The walls were finished with drywall, painted a pale, faded yellow. A small, clean window set into the eaves let in a soft, gray light. In one corner, there was a simple wooden bed frame with a thin, bare mattress. Next to it, a small nightstand with an old oil lamp on it. In the center of the room, there was a small, pot-bellied stove, its pipe running up to a vent in the roof. And against the far wall, a sturdy wooden desk and a chair. It was Spartan, simple, but it was a home. Someone had lived here. My grandfather. He had lived here, in this secret room above the empty barn. Maya's anxious voice came from below. "Elle, are you okay? What's up there?" "You have to see this," I said, my own voice hushed with awe. After a moment's hesitation, I heard her start to climb the ladder. Her head appeared through the opening, her eyes wide. She pulled herself up and stood beside me, speechless. She walked over to the small bed, running her hand over the bare mattress. She touched the cold metal of the little stove. She looked around the small, clean space, her anger and frustration melting away, replaced by a profound confusion. "He lived here?" she whispered. "Why would he live up here?" I didn't know, but I knew we were standing in the heart of the mystery. My eyes scanned the room, looking for a clue, an explanation. And then I saw it. Tucked neatly under the desk, almost as if it had been left there for us to find, was a large black metal footlocker secured with a heavy brass lock. We both saw the footlocker at the same time. It was the only thing in the room that seemed purposefully stored away, an object of intention in a space defined by Spartan necessity. It was an old military-style trunk, its black paint chipped at the corners, revealing the dull gray of the metal beneath. The brass lock was tarnished but solid, It looked impenetrable. "What do you think is inside?" Maya whispered, her earlier hostility completely gone, replaced by a childlike curiosity. "I don't know," I said, my heart thumping, "but I think he wanted us to find it." We knelt on the floorboards in front of it. I gave the lock a useless tug. It was solid. We looked around the small room for something to pry it open with, but there was nothing. The desk was bare except for a few empty jam jars holding pens and pencils. The drawers were empty. Then my eyes fell on the oil lamp on the nightstand. Its base was heavy glass. Its purpose was light, but its weight felt like a tool. It was a long shot. I picked it up, surprised by its heft. "Stand back," I told Maya. I held the lamp by its neck, took a deep breath, and brought the heavy glass base down hard on the brass lock. The first blow just made a loud, clanging sound that echoed in the quiet loft, leaving a small dent. Maya flinched. I did it again, harder this time, putting all my frustration and fear and desperate hope into the swing. On the third strike, there was a sharp crack. The brass hasp of the lock fractured and broke. The chest was open. We looked at each other for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. Then with trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid. The inside of the trunk smelled of cedar and old paper. It was packed neatly. On top lay a small stack of photographs tied together with a piece of twine. I lifted them out. The top photo was of a young woman with our eyes and a smile that lit up her whole face. Our mother. She was standing in front of a small white farmhouse, her arm around a tall, lanky man with a kind face and work-roughened hands. Our grandfather. In the photo, the sun was shining, the fields behind them were green, and everything looked full of life. It was a picture from another world, a world before sickness and loss, before St. Jude's. Beneath the photos was a thick, sealed envelope. On the front, in a shaky but neat hand, was written, "For Eleanor and Maya." My fingers fumbled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were several pages of stationery, filled with that same handwriting. It was a letter. I unfolded it and began to read aloud, my voice unsteady. "My dearest granddaughters, if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have come home. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry I was not a better grandfather. I am sorry I was not in your lives. After your mother passed, the grief was a storm that I thought would tear me apart. I looked at you, two small girls with her eyes, and I saw all that I had lost. I was a coward. I let the state take you because I didn't think I had anything left to give. It is the greatest regret of my life." I had to stop, my throat tight with emotion. Maya reached out and put her hand on my arm, her own eyes shining with tears. I took a breath and continued reading. "I know you must have questions. I know you must be wondering why I left you nothing but this old barn. The truth is, the barn is all I had left to give. The farmhouse you see in the photograph, our family home for 100 years, is gone. When your mother got sick, the medical bills they were a mountain. I sold off parcels of the land, piece by piece, to pay them. Then I took out a second mortgage on the house. I did everything I could to give her more time. When she was gone, the bank came for the house. I lost it. I couldn't bear to leave the land, so I moved into the loft. I saved this barn and the last 10 acres from the wreckage. It's not much, but it's ours. It's the last piece of this family left in the world. I know about the tax bill. I know about the offer from Westridge Properties. I know they will come to you with a check and a promise of an easy way out. The money must look like a lifeline. I will not tell you what to do. The choice must be yours. But before you decide, I want you to know what you are standing on. This land is not just dirt and weeds. It is your history. It is your mother's childhood. It is the place your roots are. Don't sell your roots for a handful of paper. There is more in this chest. Look deeper. Understand what you are fighting for. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. I failed you, but I never stopped loving you. Your grandfather, Elias." When I finished reading, the loft was completely silent except for the sound of our breathing. I looked at Maya. Tears were streaming freely down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. She reached out and took the photograph of our mother from my hand, tracing the outline of her smiling face with her fingertip. The letter had changed everything. The derelict barn was no longer a symbol of neglect and poverty. It was a symbol of sacrifice. The farmhouse wasn't lost to carelessness. It was lost in a desperate battle to save our mother's life. And our grandfather wasn't a man who had abandoned us. He was a man broken by grief who had held on to the last possible piece of our family for us, living in a secret room, guarding it until we could come home. I looked around the small, clean loft. I saw it now not as a place of poverty, but as a fortress. This was his last stand. He had saved this for us. The anger and resentment I had harbored for him, a quiet, simmering bitterness I hadn't even realized was there, simply evaporated. It was replaced by a profound, aching sadness and a fierce, protective love for this man I had never met. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was real, and his final words echoed in my head. Don't sell your roots for a handful of paper. I looked at the footlocker. There is more in this chest. Look deeper. There was more to the story, and for the first time I felt a sense of purpose. We weren't just deciding whether to sell a piece of land. We were deciding whether to honor a lifetime of struggle and sacrifice. Maya finally looked up from the photograph, her eyes red-rimmed and raw. He lost the house for her, she whispered, her voice thick with a pain that was a decade old. All this time I thought they just didn't want us. The story we had told ourselves for 10 years, the story of being unwanted, discarded children, had been a lie. Or at least not the whole truth. The truth was messier, sadder, and filled with a kind of desperate, flawed love we had never imagined. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. So what do we do, Elle? She asked, her voice small. The money is still there. The debt is still real. The pragmatic part of her was still fighting, but her heart was clearly broken open, and that was the moment of our first real crisis. The revelation hadn't solved our problem. It had only made it harder. Before, the choice was simple, a rotting barn versus a pile of cash. Now it was a legacy versus a lifeline. To sell felt like spitting on his grave. To stay felt like an act of financial suicide. The weight of the 90-day deadline pressed down on me. How could two teenagers with nothing to their names possibly raise that kind of money? The developer's offer was a guaranteed escape from the edge of a cliff. Grandpa's letter was asking us to jump, trusting that we'd learn to fly on the way down. I could see the war in Maya's face. She wanted to believe, to honor him, but the years at St. Jude's had taught her to be a survivor. Survivors don't take foolish risks. They take the sure thing. We can't do it, Elle, she said, her voice hardening again as she rebuilt her walls. It's a nice story, but it's just a story. We're going to end up with nothing. Worse than nothing. We'll be on the street. She stood up and paced the small loft, her agitation filling the space. We sell. We use the money to get a place. I'll finish school. You can get a real job. We can be normal. Isn't that what you've always wanted? She was right. It was all I had ever wanted. A normal life. A safe life. One where we didn't have to worry about where our next meal was coming from, or whether we'd have a roof over our heads. I looked from her anguished face to the open letter in my hands. His words felt like a direct challenge. Understand what you are fighting for. What were we fighting for? An idea, a memory, or something more tangible? I felt like I was standing on a precipice, and both paths led to a different kind of loss. If we sold, we lost our past. If we stayed, we could lose our future. The conflict wasn't just between me and Maya anymore. It was inside me. My head was screaming at me to take the money, to be practical, to protect my sister. But my heart, a part of me I barely knew existed, was whispering something else. It was telling me that this was a test, that our real inheritance wasn't the land, but the choice itself. Listen, if you've made it this far into the story, it's probably because you know what it feels like to be at a crossroads like this. Maybe you've had to choose between the safe path and the one that felt right in your gut, even if it made no sense to anyone else. It's a lonely place to be. The world tells you to be practical, to take the money, to cut your losses. But sometimes there are things that are worth more than money. Things you can't put a price on, like family, history, and a place to call your own. If this is hitting you right now, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to make a choice that defied all logic? I read every single comment, And I think it's important we share these stories, because knowing you're not alone in that struggle, that can make all the difference. Now let's get back to the loft. I let Maya pace, her fear and frustration a palpable energy in the small room. I didn't try to argue with her. Instead, I turned back to the footlocker. Looked deeper. Beneath the space where the letters had been was a false bottom, a thin piece of cedar planking. I pried it up with my fingernails. Underneath was a second, smaller compartment, and inside this compartment was a small, heavy canvas bank bag and another thicker stack of letters, tied with the same twine. I lifted the bag out first. It was heavy. I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto the floorboards. It wasn't money, not exactly. It was a collection of things: a compass, a folded hand-drawn map of the property, and a small leather-bound journal. I opened the journal. It was filled with Grandpa's handwriting, but it wasn't a diary. It was filled with dates, notes, and observations, names of people I didn't know, license plate numbers, records of meetings. It looked like the notes of a private investigator. Maya stopped pacing and came to kneel beside me. "What is all that?" she asked, her voice quiet again. I picked up the thicker stack of letters. These were different. They weren't addressed to us. They were copies of official correspondence. Letters from Mr. Abernathy to West Ridge Properties. Letters from West Ridge back to him. There were geological survey reports, water quality tests. And then I found it. A letter from a former employee of West Ridge, a whistleblower. I began to read it aloud. It detailed a systematic and illegal campaign by the development company to drive down property values in the area. They had been buying up land, and on the parcels they owned upstream, they were intentionally contaminating the groundwater with agricultural runoff, just enough to make the wells of the farms downstream test poorly. Then they would use those test results to make insultingly low offers, claiming the land was compromised. They were creating the blight they claimed to be cleaning up. They were preying on old farmers, people like our grandfather, who were already struggling. It was all there. Grandpa hadn't just been a stubborn old man refusing to sell. He had been fighting back. He was gathering evidence. The journal was his investigation. The letters were his proof. He wasn't just trying to save his own land. He was trying to save the entire community. A cold fury washed over me, displacing the fear and uncertainty. They hadn't just been trying to buy our land. They had been trying to steal it. They had bullied and lied and cheated this community, and they had hounded a grieving old man who was just trying to protect the last thing he had in the world. They were the reason his tax debt was so high. His well had been one of the first to be compromised, his crop yields had plummeted, and his finances had collapsed long before his final illness. They hadn't just taken advantage of his misfortune, they had engineered it. Maya was reading over my shoulder, her eyes wide with disbelief, and then a slow, burning anger that mirrored my own. "They're criminals," she whispered. "They did this to him. They did this to us." All the fight went out of her. The pragmatic survivor was gone, replaced by the granddaughter of a man who had died fighting. She looked around the small loft, at the evidence of his secret war spread out on the floor. She finally understood. This wasn't about a barn. It was about justice. The choice was suddenly, blindingly clear. It was no longer about money versus sentiment. It was about right versus wrong. It was about finishing the fight our grandfather had started. I looked at her, my heart pounding with a new, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of purpose. "We can't sell to them, Maya," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time all day. "We can never sell to them." She looked at me, and for the first time we were in complete agreement. A slow, determined nod was her only answer. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of the room. The 90-day clock was still ticking. The mountain of debt was still just as high. We were still two teenagers with no money and no resources. But now we had something we didn't have before. We had a reason. We had a cause. We knew what we were fighting for. The decision settled a strange calm over us. The overwhelming anxiety was replaced by a sharp, focused clarity. We knew what we had to do. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the loft, poring over every document, every note in Grandpa's journal. We pieced together the timeline of West Ridge's predatory campaign. It was methodical, cruel, and meticulously documented. He had built a powerful case against them. He just ran out of time to use it. As dusk began to settle, tinting the light in the loft from gray to a soft lavender, we repacked the evidence carefully into the footlocker. We couldn't leave it here. It was too important. That night we made the choice to stay, not just for a night, but for good. We dragged the thin mattress from the bed frame and laid it on the floor, closer to the pot-bellied stove. We didn't have any firewood, so we huddled together for warmth under our thin jackets, using our duffel bags as pillows. The floorboards were hard and the air was cold, but for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I was home. Lying there in the darkness, listening to the old barn groan and settle around us, I didn't feel scared. I felt protected. It was as if the spirits of our mother and the grandfather we now knew were there in the shadows with us, guarding the place they had fought so hard to keep. The next morning we walked back into town. We felt different. We walked with a purpose we hadn't had before. We weren't orphans anymore, adrift in the world. We were the custodians of a legacy. Our first stop was a small diner on Main Street. The $200 from the state wouldn't last long, but we were starving. The place was warm and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. A woman with a kind face and a tired smile took our order. She looked at us with the same curiosity as everyone else, but there was no suspicion in it. "You two new in town?" she asked. "Sort of," I said. "We're Elias Abernathy's granddaughters." Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, honey, Elias, he was a good man. So stubborn. We all miss him." For the first time, we felt a flicker of belonging. We weren't just strangers. We were Elias's girls. After breakfast, we went to see Mr. Abernathy. We walked into his dusty office, and this time, we weren't scared or lost. We were clients. He looked surprised to see us so soon. "Have you made a decision?" he asked, gesturing for us to sit. "Yes," I said. I hoisted the heavy canvas bag onto his desk. "We're not selling." I then laid out the journal and the whistleblower's letter on his desk. "And we think you need to see this." He put on his half-moon glasses and began to read. We watched as his expression shifted from professional curiosity to shock, and then to a slow, simmering rage. He read every word, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking older and more tired than he had the day before. "I knew it," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew there was something rotten about that company. Elias tried to tell me, but he was always so secretive. He never showed me this. This changes everything." He looked at us, his eyes sharp and focused. "This is dangerous evidence, girls. West Ridge is a billion-dollar corporation. They do not play nice. If they find out you have this, they will try to crush you." "We know," I said, "but we can't let them get away with it. We have to finish what he started." Mr. Abernathy stared at us for a long time. I could see him weighing the risks, the monumental task ahead. We were asking him to take on a giant, with two penniless teenagers as his only allies. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time we had seen him smile, and it transformed his weary features. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," he said. "All right, let's go to war." That meeting was the beginning of everything. Mr. Abernathy filed an injunction to halt the county's foreclosure proceedings, citing the evidence of criminal conspiracy. It bought us time. He also helped us set up a trust for Maya, ensuring her portion of any potential settlement would be protected. The 90-day clock was paused, but our problems were far from over. We were still broke and living in a barn with no electricity or running water. The first few weeks were the hardest. We bought supplies from the town's general store, buckets for water, which we hauled from a communal well in town, candles and oil lamps for light, canned food and a small propane stove for cooking. We used Grandpa's pot-bellied stove for heat, learning to forage for fallen branches and dry wood in the 10 acres of woods behind the barn. Life was stripped down to its bare essentials: warmth, water, food. It was hard, physical work, but it was honest. Every bucket of water we hauled, every piece of wood we chopped, felt like an investment in our home. We started cleaning the barn. We swept away decades of dust and cobwebs. We scrubbed the loft until the pale yellow walls were bright again. We found old quilts and blankets in another trunk, musty but intact, and washed them by hand in a galvanized tub. Slowly, painstakingly, we were turning the barn from a ruin into a sanctuary. The community, which had at first been wary of us, began to open up. The diner owner, whose name was Sarah, started saving us leftovers at the end of the day. The man at the hardware store gave us a discount on nails and patching materials. They had all known and respected our grandfather, and when word got out that we were staying, that we were fighting West Ridge, we were no longer just Elias's granddaughters. We were one of them. Mr. Abernathy began the painstaking legal process. He used Grandpa's journal as a roadmap, reaching out to the other families mentioned in his notes. At first, people were scared. West Ridge had intimidated them into silence. But when we showed them we weren't backing down, that we had proof, they started to talk. We held meetings in our barn, a small group of farmers and landowners huddled around the stove, sharing stories of threats, lowball offers, and mysterious well contamination. Our barn became the headquarters of a rebellion. We discovered that the small canvas bag from the footlocker contained something else of value. The hand-drawn map, when compared with the geological surveys, showed the location of an underground spring on our property, one that was deep and protected from the surface runoff. Grandpa had known about it. It was our ace in the hole, proof that our land had a source of clean water, making it far more valuable than West Ridge claimed. The fight was long and ugly. West Ridge's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They tried to have the case dismissed. They tried to paint us as opportunistic squatters. They sent private investigators to dig up dirt on us, on our grandfather, on Mr. Abernathy. But Grandpa's evidence was too solid, and with the testimony of the other families, the case against them grew stronger every day. We had to take on part-time jobs in town to survive. I worked at the diner with Sarah, washing dishes and waiting tables. Maya, who was a gifted artist, started selling sketches of the town and the landscape to the few tourists who passed through. It was barely enough to get by, but we managed. We were a team. After nearly a year with a class action lawsuit looming and their criminal practices about to be exposed in court, West Ridge Properties finally blinked. They offered a settlement. It wasn't just for us, it was for all the families they had targeted. It was a massive sum. It would pay off everyone's debts, compensate them for their losses, and establish a fund for environmental cleanup. And for us, it meant the tax debt was gone. The barn and the 10 acres were ours, free and clear, forever. There was enough left over to ensure Maya could go to any college she wanted, and that I would never have to worry about keeping the lights on again. We won. We finished the fight. On the day the settlement was finalized, Maya and I walked out of Mr. Abernathy's office and back to the barn, just as we had that first day. But this time the sun was shining. The world felt full of color. The barn didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked strong, defiant. It looked like home. We spent the next few years making it one. We used some of the settlement money to run electricity and water to it. We repaired the roof and replaced the rotten siding. We turned the vast open space downstairs into a workshop for Maya and a living area for us. The loft remained our sanctuary, our bedroom, a reminder of where it all began. We never built a new house. The barn was our house. Looking back, I realize our grandfather gave us something far more valuable than money or land. He gave us a purpose. He gave us a connection to our past. He gave us a community. He taught us that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you choose to do with it. He left us a choice, and in making it, we found ourselves. We found our strength. We reclaimed our family's name, not by selling it, but by fighting for it. The barn still stands in its field, but the field is no longer choked with weeds. It's a garden now. Life has come back to this place. This whole journey taught me that home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's the history that soaks into the floorboards. It's the community that surrounds you. It's the fight you're willing to endure to protect it. It's a choice you make every single day. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place you were born or a place you have found? Share your story in the comments below. Let's fill this space with stories of what we fight for. And if our story meant something to you, if it gave you a little bit of hope, please consider subscribing to the channel. You're not just a viewer here. You're part of a community of people who understand that sometimes the most broken places are the ones most worth saving.